The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida. Welcome to episode 4 of the Florida Podcasting News Show on the Florida Podcast Network. Florida Podcasting News keeps you on the inside of Florida's podcasting industry.
On today's episode, we'll be talking a lot about things happening in the press in Florida, what newspapers are getting into podcasting, and one that just wrote an article that might have included us.
Maybe.
We also chat about a new way to combine radio and podcasts, a test of the Anchor app, and Patreon is changing things up again. Plus, in the tips section, we talk about what needs to be included in your website, and yes, you should have one. Listen in.
This episode is brought to you once again by me and my company, Flintstone Media. Thanks for joining us. This is Jaime.
And this is Glenn, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Florida Podcasting News Show. Between the two of us, we have over 8,000 episodes of experience and about 55 years of podcasting
And he's way older, guys, so I'm guessing you can guess who has the bulk of those 8,000 episodes. I gotta do it, gotta mention it at least once.
We have a lot to talk about. God, there's so much happening in podcasting right now. We're just picking out a teeny-weeny little portion to talk about.
But on the show, it's just released on the 1st and the 15th of every month. And the one on the 15th has a monthly newsletter that accompanies it. And you can find all of that, including the older newsletters, at floridapodcastingnews.com. And with that, we'll just move straight into the Florida industry news section. I understand that you have done some digging, Glenn, and found some interesting information on what newspapers are doing here in Florida in the world of podcasting.
Well, we had been contacted by one or two of them here, and to talk about podcasting. And I know I met at least one that was at Podfest. So it got me curious to look around the state at the biggest newspapers and see who was doing podcasts and whether I could find them. By the way, finding them on their websites was the hardest thing I did because they just don't put anything up front and center. It's like they're hiding them.
You're giving me a flashback to when Florida Podcast Network was like the first time I ever thought about it. I was doing research on the same thing. I was like, let me see how many podcasts are there in Florida and what am I going to do with the network? I didn't know what direction I was going to take it. And yeah, you're right. I would come across newspapers thinking they have to have podcasts or something, and they were so hard to find. They were in like the little corners.
Yes, exactly.
Terrible.
Except for one, and that was the biggest one, and that's the Orlando Sentinel has 10 podcasts, and they are up front and center, and they are they're released on a regular basis. And I kind of broke down what the podcasts were. So they have a total of 10, which might be as far as a regional paper like that, might be a record. They have one murder podcast, of course. It's like a requirement.
Of course, I mean,
yeah. They have 7 sports podcasts. Right there.
Wow.
But then Orlando has a lot of sports teams, so it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I get it.
And they have one general news podcast, and then they have one tech podcast. So then I moved to Miami, and God, Miami was a mess. They have a couple of...
You can say that for all kinds of reasons sometimes.
Well, they have a couple of podcasts. I forget, it's the Miami Herald. What is it? The Herald?
Miami Herald, yeah.
They have a couple podcasts that are hidden away, and they appear to be podcasts that they're pulling from affiliate newspapers like out of D.C. So it didn't appear to be produced.
Not local.
Not local. They were not local. They were just general politics.
Fail. What are you doing, Miami Herald?
Again, they might have them. I couldn't find them. All right. So that's
major fail. Yeah, what are you doing, Miami Herald?
It goes to our conversation later in this episode, actually.
Yeah.
The Tallahassee Democrat has one called The Tallahassee Democrat. And it is kind of messed up. It was a mess. I mean, the show notes were non-existent. It was almost like it didn't have a title. It was just a mess. it looked like maybe an intern put a podcast together, and it was a mess.
Yeah, we see that a lot these days. Companies with all the money in the world turning to an intern who has no idea what they're doing just because someone falls into what comes after generation millennials, whatever's after that, Z or whatever it is. Just because someone falls into that age range doesn't mean they're suddenly a genius on all things podcasting, social media, website building, et cetera, et cetera.
It was a mess. All right, then the Tampa Bay Times. So I went over to Tampa and I found one called Life of the Party. And it's
that sounds fun.
Yeah, and then there was a murdery one called Blood and Truth. And that one was very hard to find.
The blood or the truth?
The blood and the truth. Life of the Party was like, I think, a local, what's going on in Tampa kind of thing. But that's it. Yeah. That's all I could find in the major cities here in Florida.
Well, you know what? It just goes to show you. I mean, we know what time we're in right now, where podcasting is becoming so well known in just general culture now that now people are trying to figure out how they get in. And that's the thing. The resources still aren't there. I mean, that's why we're doing this show. We're trying to contribute to the resources space for podcasting. But, so as newspapers or any other brand or business tries to get in the space, they fail in all these millions of ways, like not having the website right, not having the show notes right, not having this right. So I get it. I mean, we've been, like you're saying, we are being asked about podcasting more than ever right now. We got pulled out of a room at Podfest to be interviewed for the local news about podcasting because there's now an interest and people want to figure it out. And
speaking of which,
not only did we get pulled out of a room at Podfest, but I got a voicemail right after Podfest from a reporter named Evan Williams from Florida Weekly. It's a newspaper that is all across the state, but they have like regional sections of it. So there's a Fort Myers section where he writes out of, and he wanted to know about. He was tasked with writing a story about Florida podcasts and podcasts out of Florida. So yay me and my SEO skills. When he Googled podcasts in Florida, guess who came right up?
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because you would think there has to be like...
People have been a lot longer than we have.
Yeah, Lou Mangello's been doing it for 12 years about Disney, but he searched Florida podcast.
Yeah. We came up and that'll actually, again, touch on something we're going to get into later with our tip. But so he ended up asking to do an interview about Florida Podcast Network and podcasts in Florida. So, of course, the podcast I shared, like all ours, right? Finding Florida. I told him about the guys out in Fort Myers, Ed and Kim Ryan. I said, well, you're in Fort Myers. Why don't you go down? They actually do their show live on Facebook every Saturday morning. And he actually went down there and checked him out and did an interview and took pictures and all that. So people are really getting interested in what podcasting is, how they can be a part of it, how they can use it to create their content. They're all different challenges that print media is facing these days. Digital media is now becoming the main source for everything. And this is another type of digital media that is just really ginning up some interest. And it's so exciting that when people want to know about Florida podcasting, they are asking us. So go team.
Speaking of the team, and then our last item in Florida podcast news, I was forced to look at numbers today because one of my clients was asking, and you know how I hate to look at numbers. So I was looking at numbers, and I got adding up, and I have to hold the record for doing the most number of episodes about one type of animal in the world. Because I figured it out. I've done...
Iguanas.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what you're known for, right?
I've done 4,002 episodes about horses.
Wow.
4,002 episodes about horses.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. That has to be a record about anyone. There's nobody else has done 4,000 episodes about any animal. So yeah, I was surprised that it was that high, but that's the ones I've actually hosted. We've done almost 8,000 on the Horse Radio Network. So if I count the ones I've produced, but the ones I've hosted is 4,000.
Jeez. Imagine someone going through all that and just pulling out all the times you said the word horse and stringing them together. How long would that take to listen to?
All right, let's get into our next segment, the general podcasting news. Well, there's so much news to choose from. I mean, there's 1,000 items of podcasting news a day now, but I just picked out ones I thought were interesting and different. And of course, everybody's buying everybody, and they're paying billions of dollars, and nobody's offered us a cent. So we're not going to cover those. But iHeart came out with an announcement, a press release actually, that didn't get a whole lot of coverage, but I found it fascinating. And that is, iHeartRadio has regular radio stations around the country. And they decided on this little station, AM station in Allentown, Pennsylvania, AM 1470, to try a test on something. And they're calling it iHeart Podcast Channel. And what they're going to do is this radio station's going to do nothing but podcasts. 24 hours a day. So they have a complete lineup every day of the podcasts that you can listen to. They're like an hour each. Some are 2 hours, I guess, depending on the length of the podcast. Now, they're picking most of the major, top 20 podcasts in the world. Like Stuff You Should Know, Stuff to Blow Your Mind, Anna Faris. So they're picking all of these that are sure iHeart, related, and they're putting them on, and they're going to have lineups every day. So you'll be listening to nothing but podcasts. I was kind of shocked that nobody's tried this before. They're always looking for cheap programming. This is programming that's already made. All they have to do is plug it in.
So here, I have lots of questions.
And I probably have no answers.
I'm sure you have no answers. So iHeart, listen up. I expect an email shortly. My answers. So my first question is, number one, with podcasts, there's such flexibility on length. How are they making it more standardized? Are they increasing the length with ads? Are they
they're going to be plugging ads in every 4 minutes because that's what regular radio does. So So
I'm just wondering, what is the model for converting time-wise the content of a podcast into what is usually a standard time slot for radio? And
in radio, the morning jocks, they have 20 minutes of talk time in every hour. The rest is news, weather, music, and commercials.
And music.
And maybe not even music if they don't play
sometimes lots of ridiculous music.
But they may not even play any music. The talk shows only get 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So, think about that. 20 minutes of every hour you're talking. The rest is just, I don't know what you're doing.
And I'm wondering, so my second question is, how are they handling the advertising? So let's say, obviously, this is iHeart material already.
Right.
So it's easy. But I can see other radio stations wanting to do this, and they don't already have a portfolio of podcasts to pull into. So if they're pulling, let's say they want to approach podcasts that are already out there.
I'm sure there's a revenue split or something.
Side note that these are discussions that have been happening in our, around our spaces. So how does that, but even if the revenue split, I'm more thinking as a podcaster, it's my show. I want to know what ads are in there. I want to know, and who has control over that. I think everyone's going to have a different model, but it's really going to be interesting to see how this starts to play out if more radio stations start adopting something like this.
If there's any Florida radio stations that want a show called Finding Florida, just let us know.
I hear it's really good.
Terrific. Yes,
well produced. The hosts are hilarious.
That's right. We'll leave you some commercial breaks.
They will do anything, including break their ribs. So I have heard.
We are dedicated. So the next story is about Anchor. Now, Anchor there are some serious podcasters out there that don't like Anchor for various reasons. So you got to playing around with it, though. So I was one of them. I really, really came in it with an enthusiastic eye. I was really excited to see what is this new thing on the market. This is back 2 years ago when Anchor first came out. And it was right around the time that I was heading to Podcast Movement for the first time in California. Right around the time, just before I got hired by you at Horse Radio Network. So the time for me to discover it was perfect. And because what Anchor was back then, it was almost like an audio version of Snapchat, where you would record something. They gave you a 5-minute limit. It was really super easy to apply a music bed, which would then run underneath it. And it was well leveled. And then you just post it.
And it was super easy, but the 5-minute restriction, first of all, drove me nuts. Second of all, it would disappear after 24 hours, which
in 5 minutes
gives me hives. Like, I don't want to produce content that disappears. I don't like it. So literally, this is what I used to do. I wanted to retain it. So there was no way to download it, no way to export it, nothing like that. So the only option was I took my little mini me recorder, set it on the table, hit record, set my phone on the table, brought up my Anchor episode, hit play, and recorded it that way. And I actually had some episodes out of Curve the Cube, my old podcast, that I actually included those in. So you can actually rewind back to those last few episodes of Curve the Cube and listen. But alternatively, when I decided to rediscover it, was actually because my friend was showing interest in it, had all these questions, and I said, well, I haven't looked at it in 2 years. Let me take a look. So I dove back into Anchor. And let me tell you what I found was a whole bucket full of happiness because, number one, I was ecstatic that all that audio I thought was long gone from 2 years ago, they had archived it. So I was able to rediscover that, which was really, really cool. Now the way the Anchor is no longer like a Snapchat model. So you no longer have a time limit. You can record, I think, a single session up to an hour and then just start over again or keep recording or what have you. And then you can stitch your audio together super easy on their desktop. And it doesn't expire anymore, which is also really important. Now, when I say that you can stitch your audio together super easy, it comes with a caveat because it is really easy. It's like putting blocks together one by one in a line, right? And it basically just says, okay, I'm going to play block A, and then I'm going to play block B, and then I'm going to play block C. And that's how it creates the episode. So you can't really edit the details. It's not like a Hindenburg or an Audacity or something where you can really get in there and edit. You can't do that. At least not that I could see. I really don't think you can. And now the music beds they don't lay them as a bottom track underneath their whole thing. They're just bumpers, which I actually prefer now that this is a different model. But anyways, it's a lot better of a back end. You can do a lot more with it. And the one thing I think is the most exciting piece is that they've now made monetization really, really super easy with Anchor. And so you can set it up to either monetize through the sponsored ads, which I'm assuming are dynamically inserted. I didn't try it. I didn't check it out. I'm not a fan of dynamic ads. Or you can do a button for listener support, like a Patreon or something. So it's really simple. Now, if I were to try to be a professional podcaster, would I choose Anchor? Absolutely not. I still want the control of being able to edit, be able to.
And then I got to ask you too. One of the big complaints that Dave Jackson always brings up is that they own the feed, that they submit the feed and they own the feed for like iTunes and Apple and stuff. Is that still true?
So, this is a big. Actually, thank you for bringing that up. When you set up your show, one of the very last screens, it asks you if you want to have your feed submitted automatically or if you want to do it yourself. And then they put in parentheses, advanced, right? And I was trying to do it so fast. I didn't think I was actually going to be using Anchor indefinitely. I was literally just basically reactivating my account so I could dig into it for my friends' curiosities. So I just, without thinking, just hit submit automatically, which is exactly what Dave Jackson is talking about. And as soon as I did that, I was like, no, as I realized what I had done. It was going to submit it on my behalf, which means on their own behalf, right? So what I was able to do once I put out a first episode is I quickly grabbed that RSS feed, went into my Podcast Connect account in iTunes, and I submitted it myself. And I was able to claim that show. So I own that show. It is in my account. It's my show. Now, that is true on iTunes. The two I wasn't able to successfully submit on my own were, if I remember correctly, Google Play, because it didn't have the RSS feed didn't have Google Play tags filled in, and Stitcher because the RSS feed didn't have the email tags filled in. Now, even though I had submitted my email, obviously in my account and in my show on Anchor, it didn't apply my email address to the RSS feed. So that was keeping me from submitting it myself. And because obviously I'd chosen Anchor to do it on their own, they created a weird random email address at anchor.fm or something like that. and submitted it themselves to those other two. So in Google Play, in Stitcher, I don't think I own those, but in iTunes, at least I did. So caveat, don't do what I did and go so quickly through the setup screens that you accidentally choose for them to be automatically submitted. Make sure you choose the advanced settings, and it shouldn't be a problem anymore. But Dave Jackson was absolutely right. It was a big issue with Anchor when it first came out.
Very good. And again, if you're going to be getting into this seriously, it's still not one that we really recommend. No. One more little thing I will say that is pretty cool. You can do like conference recording. And so I'm going to be testing that out with Vivi at some point. Maybe we'll play it on a future episode. And so if you want to go follow me, because by the way, I'm using Anchor. I should probably mention. For kind of like your diary show, right?
Yeah, like a daily diary. It's not daily by any stretch of the imagination, but as an ongoing diary of my podcasting career. So if you want a behind the scenes look of that, that's what I'm using it for. I'm not using it for any serious podcasting. So when I test out the conference feature, I'll include it on a future episode. So look up Jemmy's Curved Cube Continues, now available in iTunes.
I need to start listening to this, make sure I know what you're saying about me.
That's all the bad things, I promise.
Well, Patreon launched, decided to make a change again, only this time they're actually notifying the creators before they put it out to the public.
Oh, well, thank you, Patreon.
They learned from the last time. If you weren't familiar with that, they decided to make this huge change, which affected all of us who have Patreon creator accounts, and they didn't tell anybody. And they sent all these emails out to the customers, and we all got blindsided. And in about 4 days, they retracted it all because it was such a mess. So Patreon learned this time, and they have made this announcement ahead of time, and this is what's going to happen. All current plans, like we have one for Horse Radio Network, will remain in place without change. So you're grandfathered in. That's the first thing. They made clear that nobody currently was affected because they weren't going through that again. So what they're doing is they're launching tiered subscription levels now. They're called Light, Pro, and Medium. So if you go to start a new account, you're going to be at one of these levels. So the first level is Patreon Light. And the Patreon Light is a basic option now with the ability to offer donor. You can't offer donor tiers.
To offer donuts?
Yeah, donuts.
I'm in. So
Patreon Light basically just is a basic option that allows you to take payments from your listeners. But you can't set up levels. You can't set up a $1 level, a $5 level, a $10 level like we have it with the basic plan.
Yeah, you've been doing that at Horse Radio.
Yeah, and you could offer, we offer hats at the $10 level. We offer saddle pads at the $25 level. But,
I know. I send the emails.
Yeah, that's right. So Patreon Lite, it allows you to put the donate button, but no amounts. They donate anything they wish every month or every episode, however you set it up. Then Patreon Pro is like the old one used to be. That one you can set up and you can put levels and perks and all of that just like the old one used to be. And all the people like Horse Radio Network that have accounts already are going in under Patreon Pro.
So that's the grandfathering.
That's the middle one. Then gotcha. Patreon Premium is another new one, and that's going to target established businesses with large followings who need advanced features like dedicated partner managers, merchandise services, team accounts. We're talking
too fancy for us.
Yeah, we're talking very large accounts there. You're talking you're getting donations from 30,000 people. And so that's going to be the minority, probably 2% of their whole population. What's going to happen is there's different levels of payment for each of those. So they're going to charge you a different percentage for each of those, going up the more fancy you get.
Gotcha.
Is what it is. So I just took a quick look at HRN, and then we'll wrap this up. So last month, we had 333 patrons. And when you took a look at the total, they were averaging $6 a person per month. So we do ours monthly, and that's about what they were averaging, is $6 a month each.
Very nice.
And we end up paying about 8 to 9% of our total income back to Patreon for their service. Do I think it's worth it? Hell yes. Because otherwise I'd have to be charging 333 people's credit cards every month. No, Jemmy would actually.
No.
That ain't happening.
No, I would hire an assistant just for that.
So that's the basics on the new Patreon. I actually kind of think these are good changes, and I think they'll be well received. So. Flintstone Media has been the digital bedrock of several Florida brands and businesses, serving as a highly resourceful website and podcast production house since 2010. Ready to be seen? Flintstone Media has crafted the online presence for dozens of brands. In creating an intelligently built website that acts as your business's beacon, Flintstone Media will craft solid and attractive content to control your brand's message, collect visitor data, and showcase what you have to offer. Ready to be heard? Work with a leader in Florida's podcasting industry and add a podcast to your brand's content offerings. From setup through recording and distribution, Jaime will lend her experience producing over 500 episodes and make the process of creating your show simple and easy for you. Visit flintstonemedia.com for website and podcast samples and to ignite your digital presence. That's flintstonemedia.com.
Okay, so as I briefly mentioned earlier in the show, our spotlight in Florida Weekly, which I'm so excited about, it was great. So he did this whole write-up. It just came out the other day, and it's now up on our everywhere. So you can find it. If you go to floridapodcastnetwork.com, you'll see the article highlighted there. And not only that, he talked to my little 10-year-old mentee, Izzy, who's just starting her show Reporting Live. So I am mentoring Izzy, and she is 10 years old and just a firecracker of potential. And I'm so excited to announce that her show, Reporting Live Podcast, is now searchable in iTunes. And I just want to put on a shameless plug and say, please, everyone, go subscribe, go look her up on Facebook and Instagram as Reporting Live Podcast, and just show her some love and some support. And if you have kids, this is a great show. My kid is 7. He's already her number one fan. So if you have kids, they'll love her show and love her. And the other thing I want to mention is a big fat thank you to all the folks at both the Hispanic Radio Conference put on by Radio Inc. magazine and all the folks at our friends at Podfest, because they were so kind. We are submitting ourselves for another speaking engagement, which hopefully we can announce in the future. And I needed some video footage, and they all, sent it to us. And so that's stuff we're now using as much as we can. And we have provided some clips from our panel appearances where we shared all kinds of podcasting tips for people. So Hispanic Radio Conference, I was on a panel discussing podcasting for radio dummies. That's literally what it was called. Their words, not mine. And it was very basic podcasting tips, advertising, how long a show could be, where you should host, et cetera, et cetera. So those clips, if you go to floridapodcastnetwork.com/HRC, you'll find all those clips there. And then the other set of clips that we are in production for clipping out and sending out are clips from our geolocal panel. And that was a really, really fun panel, wasn't it, Glenn?
Yes, it was. Yeah. And we made some new friends too.
We did. And we got a lot of really great feedback from people. So we're really proud of what we did there and all the tips that we shared there. So we're going to be clipping that out and putting that up. So once it's up and ready, you can go to floridapodcastnetwork.com/podfest 2019, and you'll see some great tips on starting a geolocal podcast. And in general, we just want people to subscribe and join the Florida Podcast Network feed. Again, in iTunes, please, or anywhere else you're listening, all your podcatchers, Stitcher, all that. You can subscribe there and you'll get all of our shows. Next, we have our final tip.
Well, this comes from some of the conversations that have been at some of the Facebook pages recently, right?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And, we've noticed that there are always certain themes. People have a lot of the same questions, especially new podcasters. And a lot of these questions really start to buzz right after a conference. Everybody's in the different communities asking questions. Well, this one came from actually a podcast movement community page. And Dan Franks started this post. He basically started as a PSA to tell people to make it really easy for your listeners to subscribe to your show on your website. And what I thought was really interesting was this one podcaster's question. And he said, I'll name redacted, I thought I knew what I was doing here, but I guess I don't. I assumed if we said find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, etc., that would be enough. And then if Joe Blow has a podcast I'm interested in, I go to my iTunes, search his name, and go from there. I don't think I'd go to a website and click a link. Am I out of the loop on this? So I was looking at the answers, and I just thought we should start sharing those and join our own thoughts. And the first one we should talk about is the most basic one. Glenn, take it away. Why do podcasters need a website in the first place?
And I've seen people arguing about this, that you don't need a website for your podcast. You can just use your Libsyn page or your Podbean page, right? And this drives me crazy. And one of the reasons we talked about earlier in the show, and this is the biggest reason, is in a year and a half, we have enough Google SEO now that when a reporter from a newspaper searched Podcast Florida, we were at the top of the list. So that if you're doing that through Libsyn or any other place, that is not going to happen.
It is not going to happen because we were able to populate our website with so much content in addition to just our episodes that it drives that SEO right through the roof.
Yeah, and I realize you're going to be paying for a website, and as far as building a website, that is so freaking easy nowadays. And even buying a website space for what you're going to need if you're hosting your files at Libsyn or someplace, it's going to be cheap. You can do it for $5 to $7 a month, but it's worth it. If you're thinking ahead and thinking that this is something you want to do for a long period of time, and you want to have some clout on Google. Like you search right now, but we've been doing it for 12 years. If you search any of our guest names and put it in Google, you're going to find us on the first page of results. And us
totally.
meaning the Horse Radio Network. We're going to be there. You search horse podcasts, we're first. We would not have that if we didn't have our own website. So definitely have your own website. But yes, we did a survey recently with our Horse Radio Network people. 30% of our people found us through Google searches. So if they find us through a Google search, this is why you need to have the information that Dan was talking about. They come into Horse Radio Network, but if there's no place on the page how to subscribe, they don't know how to subscribe. They don't know what to search for. So yes, a lot of people search on their players, subscribe from there. But if they're coming in through your website, then have all those subscribe buttons there.
Absolutely. So, and the easier you can make it for someone to subscribe, the better. So when they get to your website, again, build a website. But when they get there, you want those subscribe buttons immediately available. You want them predominantly displayed on your home page. And then in addition to that, you also want them, other standard places that go throughout the site. And those places include your header, your footer. If you have a sidebar, put it in your sidebar. You can even put it in your navigation menu. You can put a navigation drop down that says all the different places to subscribe. Another thing you can do is have a landing page specifically describing how to subscribe. But most importantly, have it right there on the website, on the homepage of the website, so that it is really, really clear and obvious to people. And if you only say, I'm on iTunes or what have you, then Ted Cochran actually made a really good point. He says you're basically throwing away like half of your potential audience by not giving more options for Android users. We hear about iTunes, it's the big kahuna, but not everybody is on iTunes. And in fact, Dave Jackson also mentioned in the same chat string, he's like, remember, 80% of Europe is on an Android phone. So you need to have all of those options for subscription, for subscribing to your show right then, front and center on your homepage.
Which we do very well at Horse Radio Network. There are huge buttons. You cannot miss it.
You can't miss them. And not only do they click through to the links, but you actually have like instructions for the really needy.
Yep. But you know what?
On how to subscribe.
50% of the people still don't know how to listen to a podcast. So they're there for those people. Yeah,
it's true. So hopefully we've convinced you of the why, right? But now we need to get into the how, because half the comments in this string were also very confused people on the how. So, you want the Apple Podcasts, and then you also want like Google, Spotify, Stitcher. You want even your basic RSS feed URL there, because let's say someone has a very specific player that they're using that they love, and for whatever reason your show's not already in it, then they can pull your RSS feed and get your show still a lot of the time. So have your RSS feed too. So what you do for step one is get those links, right? So you can get them through your hosting account, or just go to the different players and look them up, and then press the little button on the side to share it, and then copy the link and then put it in a document somewhere, and then get all those links, right? That's step one. Collect your links. Step two is collect the images to represent those links. So just do a Google image search for iTunes, for Stitcher, and get all those little logos or what have you. And then another side note, especially if you're not very web savvy, if you're getting all these different icons, these different logos they're going to be different sizes, and they're going to display likely different sizes if you're not too familiar with how to do it otherwise on your website. If you want them uniform, make them uniform before you even put them on your website. So shrink them down so they're all kind of the same size.
And a piece of advice there. Just go to a bunch of other podcasts and you'll find somebody that has them all uniform and just
all of
use
them.
Yeah,
exactly. That is very good.
This is not like copyrighted material, these buttons.
That's very good advice. So then you're going to put the images on your site somewhere. Now, every website is going to be different. I wish I could go through and explain how to do it with every single theme on WordPress, and how to do it on Wix and the GoDaddy Builder and et cetera. Can't do that. Not enough time here. But contact your customer support or your local nerdy friend and get assistance.
Your 5-year-old child will help you with
right,
that.
how to put the images on your website. And then when you attach the link to each image, you want to make sure you set that link to open in a new tab. That way, when the visitors on your site, it doesn't take them away from your site. And we're going to put in some HTML code, some very basic HTML code in the show notes in case you need a little bit of guidance on how to, if you have to use HTML in your site to put the image with the link, you can use this little added bit. So I'm going to put that into the show notes for everybody. But hopefully that helps. You know, we actually have, for example, on Finding Florida, it's a row on the homepage right there. Then you click through detailed instructions on how to subscribe. So just create a basic presence for yourself somewhere that has all your links. Like, again, homepage, sidebar, header, footer. You'll be good to go. Anything to add, Glenn?
No, I think that's perfect.
All right. I usually am.
I'm just going to add one more thing. The other major reason to have your own website is you own that. Mm-hmm. It's yours. If you have a landing page on Libsyn or on one of the other players or one of the other hosts, you don't own that. That's not yours. Own that. So this is something you own. It's your property. It's yours. And you could change. You might want to change from Libsyn to Podbean at some point or to Blueberry. And what are you going to do? You're going to point everybody away from the Libsyn account. You all of a sudden don't have a homepage anymore. And now your SEO points to that. It's not there. So if you want to be serious about this is something you have to do.
I agree.
If you ever want to have sponsors someday or you ever want to make money from it, it's something you have to do.
You have to do. Own your space.
Yep.
For updates on all of this and other news, go to floridapodcastnews.com. You can find details in all of the show notes about today's episode and all the other episodes, plus sign up to receive the newsletter that accompanies this podcast on the 15th of every month. And we really love your feedback. So please join us in our closed Facebook group exclusively for our super fans of the Florida Podcast Network shows. Just search for FPN Insiders on Facebook to leave us comments and to gain access to early scoops, contests, and other special treats. So we all look forward to meeting you in there. Or if you have any podcasting news to submit for use on the show or for use in our newsletter, please email me at Jaime, Jaime, at floridapodcastnetwork.com.
Many thanks to this week's sponsor, flintstonemedia.com. And be sure to visit all the great shows on the Florida Podcast Network. You can find them at floridapodcastnetwork.com. Until next time, thanks for hanging out on the inside of Florida's podcasting industry.